What's up, everyone? This is Isaac from Hunger Smash Fitness. Just want to do a video again today. So my wife and I, we just moved, so haven't had a lot of time to actually do videos or anything for a while. But wanted to keep putting some videos out there and keep doing stuff. So today I wanted to do a video about belts, weightlifting belts and stuff like that. So it seems like, especially at the gym I was working out before, the majority of people used belts. Nobody really seemed to have any problem with it or anything like that. And I've definitely noticed that working out at the new gym where I'm at, which is a little bit more inexpensive gym. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what weightlifting belts are, what they're used for, and all that. So I wanted to just make a video just explaining what the belts are, what their purpose is, how you use them, and all that. So first of all, just know that generally speaking, wearing a belt will increase your performance. So it's not necessarily a ton, but wearing a belt for the majority of individuals will increase your performance, unless of course you're Constantine doing a 937 beltless squat or, whatever it was. And so there's a couple different instances like that where people can lift more without a belt, but I'd say that's probably below 1% of the actual people who are lifting weights in the gym. So with that, increased performance means increased weight lifted, increased weight moved, which is going to be, it's going to translate to an increased strength and size and everything else. So all the other performance benefits that are going to come with it. So looking at it from that point of view, using a belt is going to help you just do more. So if that is your purpose, if your intention is to get stronger in the gym, to lift more weight and to do more, to improve yourself physically, strength-wise, wearing a belt makes sense then. So there are some pros and cons to both training with a belt and training without a belt. Personally, just on the surface, I do both. I try and do some squats without a belt, some squats with a belt, some deadlift without a belt, some deadlift with a belt. Like I said, there's pros and cons to both. I can go into that a little bit later on in the video, but I wanted to make a mention of that in my opinion, I think it's still best to do both, to train belted and beltless. So the whole use of the weightlifting belt is fairly debated. I feel like there's a lot of people who are very against it and some people who are very for it. There's some doctors who don't like it because they think it puts excess shearing force on the spine. Some different studies like that have, I don't feel that they really carry much weight, because if you're lifting properly, you shouldn't be experiencing that anyways. But it is a hot debate, and I will allow that. So there are going to be people who feel very strongly either way. A lot of people feel that using a belt is cheating. I don't necessarily feel that it's cheating, because if you're trying to screw a screw into the wall, sure, you can do it by hand, but isn't it easier to use a drill? So there's things like that where yes, maybe it's making it a little bit easier, but we can go into that a little bit later too. So for most people who are properly using a belt, they can usually lift an increased about 5 to 15%. So those are with trained individuals. Obviously I'd say it takes probably a good 6 months to actually get comfortable wearing a belt because of how it puts pressure on your midsection and all that. So I'd say it takes about 6 months at least to kind of break it in and get used to it and everything. During that time, you're probably not going to be lifting a whole lot more. For a novice user with the belt, they're probably not going to see a lot of difference until they get comfortable with it. So yeah, there's kind of pros and cons with that. People who are experienced and know how to use the belt, usually they can get a higher increase with the belt because of how it's going to increase overall activation, which I can talk about in a little bit. So next thing, what does a belt actually do? So my belt that I have, it's just this one right here. It's a Best belt. It's Best is the company. It's the last name of the people who make them. I think if you're going to go with a weightlifting belt, don't go with Harbinger or whatever in the other ones. I would say go with a Pioneer or an Inzer or a Best belt, something like that, something that's going to be solid, it's going to last for a long time. I like my Best belt. It's lifetime guaranteed, so it's $100 or whatever, but if it ever breaks, if it ever wears out or anything like that, yeah. And most of the big belt companies are going to have policies more along those lines. Pioneer, I always hear a ton of really good stuff about them, so I would say look more along those lines. This one right here, it's a double prong, so you can see that there's two. In hindsight, I'd probably get a single prong just because, in my experience, is just as sturdy. You're not going to be applying thousands of pounds of pressure on the belt. And so a single prong is really all you're going to need. And a single prong is a lot faster and easier to put on and take off. And so it just saves some hassle. The double prong is nice, but every now and then you misalign them in the holes and then it gets a little funky. So you always have to be paying attention to all that and everything. So it's just takes longer. It's just more stuff that could go wrong. It's not necessarily bad to have a 2-prong versus a 1-prong or a lever belt. Just in my experience, I find that the single prong seems to be the best about that. So how the belt actually works. So if you want to think about it, your core, actually, I stole a LaCroix from my wife so I could use this as an example. So your core is kind of like this soda can right here, okay? So on the top, you have your diaphragm up here, and then you have your pelvic floor at the bottom, and then all this around here is your abdominals, your obliques, your paraspinals, and all that other stuff, your rectus spinae, all that. So that is the actual walls of the soda can. So if you're lifting normally, all of these need to be firing properly, okay? When you're putting a belt on, you're actually putting the belt right around here, okay? And it doesn't actually, I hear a lot of people talking about how all these different ideas about what it's doing to your spine and everything. It's not, okay? What it's actually doing is it's actually giving your muscles something to push against. So the whole idea behind the belt is that it's actually providing a thicker wall for the can here so you can put more pressure on the inside to push out against. So you can fill this can fuller. You can put more into this can and it can still keep that pressure without bursting, okay? So because of that, I will talk just briefly about that. Because of that fact, the whole intention behind using a belt is to increase your intra-abdominal pressure, okay? That is going to cause a spike in blood pressure, okay? And so if that is something that you cannot handle, I would say do not use a belt. So anyone who has an inguinal hernia, anything like that, anyone who would have severe side effects from an increased blood pressure spike, anything along those lines, I would say don't use a belt, because the intention of it is to increase that pressure, is to give you something to push against. The studies on how much it actually increases the pressure is fairly varied. Some people find that it's only 5%. Some people say 25% increase in blood pressure. Obviously, it depends on the individual. So the individual, based off of how hard you're bracing, how hard you are actually pushing against it, whether you Valsalva, how forcefully you Valsalva, all those factors are going to play into how much of a blood pressure spike you're actually going to experience. But what I would say is that if you have any reason not to, like I said, hernia, heart issues of any kind, something along those lines, don't use a belt. It's not worth it. And with that, of course, you also would want to be monitoring everything else. You'd want to be monitoring your cardio, your weightlifting, and everything. So there's a lot else that goes into it, and I feel like a belt would just be added to that list. But that's in essence what the belt is doing. It's just providing this extra layer right here, and you can see with my belt, it's fairly thick, but it's not going to be. It's not. Ideally, it shouldn't be going up over the ribs or down over your iliac crest or anything like that. It should fit between, and if you're bracing properly, if you're activating properly, it shouldn't be sliding. So next, I guess we can talk about that a little bit. I've heard some people say that when you're putting on the belt, I've heard this a lot, especially lately, it seems like, when you're putting on the belt, you want to push your belly out like it's a pregnant belly. Okay, that's what you're shooting for. And don't do that. If you are bracing to get punched, you're not going to force your gut out like a pregnant belly. You're going to flex your core. You're going to tighten your core. So that's what you want to be doing. You want to be tightening all those muscles and then apply the belt into pressure against that. Okay, so you want to be tightening the belt against a flexed core to increase that activation, that abdominal activation, the oblique activation, all that sort of stuff. You don't want to be pushing your gut out. I don't know why people say that. It seems very counterintuitive, and then they wonder why the belt moves when they do squats and deadlift, why it shifts. And it shouldn't be, and it's because you're applying it correctly. You also don't want to suck your gut in as far as you can and then apply the belt to that, because then you've essentially partially crushed this can already. If you're sucking your gut in, you've already crushed this can, and then you're going to apply a belt against that, and it's not going to do much because there's already a weakness above and below the diaphragm. You can't get the proper air. There's a lot of issues with that. So don't suck in, don't push out. No, you're just tightening your core and then cinching the belt down against that. And that's one reason also why I don't like the Harbinger belt and everything as well, because most of them have the really thin, narrow front side and then the really super fat back side. Okay, and it's not. It's not what the belt is designed to do. They're using it more as a pillow for their lumbar, and it doesn't actually give you anything to push against because the leather is so thin. So if you're gonna get a $15 belt or something like that, don't. I'd say if you want to get a belt, get a nice one. Get one that's actually going to last. I've had mine already for 4 years, I think, something like 3 years, something like that. It's been a little while. And it's in great condition, and it's still really solid, and I expect that it's going to last for a long time. It seems like it's not going to wear out anytime soon. So that's kind of how the belt works. So because of that, because of the increased intra-abdominal pressure and the increased core activation, and remember, your core is not just your six-pack abs in the front, it's the obliques, it's the erector spinae, it's the paraspinals, it's the whole everything. It's the all-encompassing. The entire walls of the soda can are the core. It's not just the label on the one side, okay? Everyone likes to focus on the label, but honestly, it's the entire wall of the can. So because of the increased core activation, a lot of studies show that you get significantly increased quad activation during squats and deadlifts, and a lot of that has to, it makes sense. If there's a stronger foundation for because the rectus femoris crosses the hip, everything else, blah, blah, blah. We can talk about that some other time, but a lot of them cross the hip. So if there's a stronger foundation for them, they're going to fire more powerfully. And that's kind of what we see with a lot of a lot of the surrounding muscles, not necessarily. So the sartorius, gracilis, a lot of those other smaller muscles, you don't see as much of an activation necessarily. Sometimes in some of them you do. Some of the studies, You do some of them, you see a decreased activation, stuff like that. It seems fairly inconclusive, but with the quads, you pretty much always see an increased activation, as well as with the hamstring. You see an increased activation in the hamstring, which is not generally considered a prime mover in this case, but you do see an increased activation in the hamstring, especially with larger sets. So a lot of the studies show that, especially with sets of more than 3 reps, you're going to get an increased hamstring activation, which is, I think, really interesting, because the hamstrings, they're very important for transferring force between the knee and the hip. But like I said, it's not generally a prime mover like the quad. But when you're doing a larger set, so if you're doing 5 reps instead of 3 or 1, as the set progresses, we see a higher and higher hamstring EMG. So the hamstring is firing more completely, and then if you do another set, it starts at a higher point. And I think it has to do a lot with the nervous system. Just generally, it limits how much the hamstring can actually fire to protect it, basically. And I think I need to look more into it, but my understanding is kind of, since the nervous system is more protected with the belt, it can get a more complete contraction with the hamstring. So yeah, kind of something to think about with that. Yeah, so in short, that's kind of, I guess it's not short, but that's kind of what a belt does. That's its general purpose. If you're thinking about buying a belt, like I said, I would go with Best Belts or Pioneer, Inzer, something along those lines, something they're well established. They build really high quality belts. They have a great return policy, everything else. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram, and they're always posting really interesting stuff. So I would look more into that. If you're thinking about wearing a belt, remember, if you have hernias, if you've had heart issues, if you have high blood pressure already, it may not necessarily be the best thing for you to wear a belt, because it's going to be increasing that blood pressure. But again, you're going to be wanting to watch a lot of other stuff as well, not necessarily just whether you're wearing a belt or not. Who should be wearing a belt, or who... Actually, so we talked about who shouldn't. Let's talk about who maybe shouldn't. And I would say with the belts, those who are in more sport-specific activities where strength is not necessarily a factor, max strength is not necessarily a factor. So I would say like throwers, swimmers, stuff like that. Even long jumpers, stuff, things along those lines. I would say that they should probably be doing more of the squats without a belt, but they're probably not necessarily doing it for max output anyways. Again, it's not going to hurt them to train with a belt, but they just have to understand that with their activities, they can't be using a belt. So that would be more of a gray area, I feel like. With a lot of the football players, linemen, stuff like that, I think, sure, you're going for max effort. You want to train your body to have the maximal output. And same thing, I would probably do the 50-50, belted and beltless. So I would train both and have your body strong in both capacities. But just know that when you're training with a belt, you can train a little bit harder. You can do a little bit more, generally speaking, once you've become accustomed to it. So who should wear a belt? I'd say anyone else. Anyone who's interested in doing powerlifting or strongman or bodybuilding or just getting into good shape. I lifted for several years without a belt. Didn't really affect me much. I know Brian Alroos also had a video where he was saying he trained for like 17 years without a belt. And then he's been using a belt for the last 5 years or whatever it is now. And he loves it. He loves the belt, but again, trains with and without it. So you don't necessarily need a belt, but it is going to increase your progress. It's going to improve your progress, and also by decreasing some of the stressors and everything, it can potentially prolong or it can increase your longevity of weightlifting. And so if your goal is to be active, to get strong, to improve your body, then it makes sense to be using a belt, because it should help increase your longevity. And I kind of feel the same way about compression sleeves. I could do a video about that as well. Some of the compression wear and support gear that they have out that you can use. I feel similarly about some of that as well. It's not necessarily cheating. It's protecting you. It's keeping you healthy. It decreases your risk of injury. And so there's a lot of studies backing that up as well. So, yeah, if you have any other thoughts or comments on the video, please let me know. If you have any evidence to the contrary, let me know as well. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And if you have anything where you think I didn't talk about something enough, or you want to know more about it, comment down below. I can always, I always try and monitor my comments, so you can always ask a question and I can try and respond to that. Or maybe I'll make another video about it if I feel like it needs a more in-depth answer. But anyways, yeah, so that's about it for today. I hope that clarifies some things and helps helps increase your understanding of what the weightlifting belt is actually used for and what its intention is, why you wear it. It's not necessarily to cushion your spine or anything like that. It's to push against. It's something for your muscles to push against, to increase that pressure. And so you just need to understand that. So anyways, that's all for today. Again, this is Isaac from Hunger Smash Fitness. I look forward to hearing from you, and just remember to always improve that 1%.